Hey everybody, we're back on the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ, and in true barbecue form, we've got one of our favorite guys to hang out with, RJ DeVera, who is from presently with Meguiar's, and you know Meguiar's as all the auto care products that you buy at every auto care store you go to. You probably have a bunch of their stuff in your trunk. You probably have a bunch of their stuff somewhere on a shelf in your garage. Well, RJ is one of the guys behind that brand, and he's one of the guys who not only helps decide what you see on the shelf, but he does a lot of the research around Meguiar's and what kind of products you need and the stuff you use. And basically, RJ is one of these guys that we wish we had the life of. This guy grew up in cars, and he was there behind the scenes and actually in front of the scenes on movies like The Fast and the Furious and different video games that that are car centric and that your kids probably play or you probably play depending on how old you are. RJ's a great guy, multifaceted, has an amazing backstory, and in honor of RJ, we were combing through the Hemmings classifieds, trying to think like, what kind of car would RJ want from Hemmings if we could actually get him to buy something from Hemmings or give him a blank check and say, RJ, pick something from Hemmings. Well, we found it, a 1973 Datsun 240Z that, let's just say, has a lot of potential. This thing's amazing. It's that orange color from the early 70s that everyone loves so much, and it's hard to replicate. This thing is a work in progress, I'll say it that way, and it's rough around the edges, but God, we love those things. We love that kind of a car because we can see what we would do with it and what we would turn it into. So take a look at that. Check out Hemmings auctions as well, where you'll find all kinds of neat stuff with a timer ticking away on every single one of those auctions. It'll get your blood pumping and get you to buy something that you probably don't need, but you definitely want. And dig into Hemmings parts. If you've got a project at home, you're going to need some parts for the stuff you're working on. So pick up a copy of Hemmings Motor News. We're still printing it after 65 plus years, and come along for the journey. So in the meantime, hit the barbecue. Come back in a couple minutes with RJ DeVera and enjoy. The thing about the Hot Rod BBQ is that it's basically a virtual wish list of who we want to come and hang out with us and cook some hot dogs, drink some beers, maybe sniffed a little alcohol, a little liquor, that kind of thing. But today, we've got someone on the podcast, on the Hot Rod BBQ, that I've been wanting to talk to and hang out with for quite a while. It's RJ DeVera, and he is from Meguiar's. And if you know Meguiar's, that means that you've probably hung out in aisle 7 at the local Cragen or O'Reilly's or AutoZone and have picked up something to take home and clean your car with, make it prettier, put some wet black on your tires, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. RJ is the guy behind all that stuff. I'd like to say anyway. And now, I'm sure you might disagree.
One of many.
One of many. Okay, one of many.
But I'm ready for the barbecue, man.
You ready for? Okay.
Yeah, let's are we ordering some stuff in, or we're making some stuff, or
during the Rona? I think what we can do is I've learned how to order alcohol from Saucy.
That's saucy.com.
And I've learned how to order Omaha steaks.
There you go.
That's omahasteaks.com.
There you go.
Soon to be sponsors of the Hot Rod BBQ.
Barbecue and bourbon, right?
Right.
Let's barbecue and bourbon.
Does it get any better than that, man? Does it get any better?
No,
now, for most of you out there, and I will tell you, we talk about things like the SEMA show. And if you're a fan of cars and car culture, the SEMA show is this aspirational, bucket list thing that guys like RJ and I have to deal with all the time. Right. This is just part of our lives. Right.
It is. And it was so weird not to be there last year. It was I've been going for 2020 would have been my 23rd year in a row. So it was so odd to not be in Vegas for SEMA in 23 years.
You're 23. That means that you must have started going to SEMA.
I was like 2.
What, 7? 2? Yeah, 6, 2. 3. You were 2. Okay, got it. Right. So, and you and I usually will see each other at the SEMA show. And then SEMA also puts on this event every January in Southern California, where it's, for everyone listening at home, it's basically what I would call a speed dating.
Yeah, that's
right?
Exactly it. Yeah. Speed dating between media and manufacturers, basically.
Exactly. And RJ, if you guys can all picture this at home, RJ is in this suite at an Embassy Suites in Orange County near the airport. And for an entire week, we have 30-minute meetings with everybody like RJ as representatives of the media. And they literally down in the atrium, if you've ever been to an Embassy Suites, there's an atrium, you know, now at the bottom, that's where you get your like Denver omelet in the morning and you get all your, you know, your free breakfast. There is, I kid you not, a fire bell, like a fire truck bell that someone from SEMA, it's probably an intern or something, rings every 30 minutes. And every 30 minutes, you have to switch suites on 4 or 6 floors of the Embassy Suites. And during that week, after you're hearing like a bell in your head for the rest of the night and in the morning, RJ is always my favorite meeting because we finally get to you at some point during that week. You know, we've shaken babies and wrung hands for like, you know, an entire week, and then we finally get to you. So it's good to see you away from the Embassy Suites.
Yes.
And the SEMA show. This is awesome.
For sure. Yeah. Right. For us on the manufacturer side, we see about 40 groups that week. And so, you know, about 60 journalists usually. So it's a long week. You definitely lose your voice on both sides, right? Because you're trying to talk about, you know, what's going on with the media entity, what's going on with the manufacturer, and are there things that we can, you know, kind of do together, right?
And that's how the sausage is made, right? Like that's how when people at home, when you're seeing videos or you're reading magazines or you're watching TV shows or anything around any kind of media around cars, it's usually has something to do with people like us getting together in these kind of strange situations, right, where it's just this crush of humanity, and then at the end of each day we all go out and get, as if we couldn't get enough of each other, we all go out and hang out and have dinner with each other even more, right? Like
that's definitely car culture, right? We all love to hang out. Is whether it's cars and coffee, at a car show, at a drag strip, at a circuit.
Exactly.
You know, and for me, I actually really enjoy it, you know, 23 years running, and I'm like super excited to hopefully go to SEMA this year. So
yes, and hopefully it sounds like it's all on.
Sounds like it's going to happen. So, you know, it's funny. I really appreciate having a year off, but it was also like, oh, I ruined my streak. Get back to
you know? I know it. But I don't see I don't think it counts though. I think there's an asterisk above it.
There should be, but it's still a year that we weren't there. We had the digital version, but it wasn't the same.
Wasn't the same. And you can say that your 23-year streak, I think that is maintained. I don't think anyone's taking anything from
COVID. Is an asterisk for everything.
Right, exactly.
So, but
tell me a little bit about what I want to know, because I don't even know this about you. I would love to go through like how someone like you, because I think this is interesting to most people, and I think this is what would happen if we were hanging out in person at a barbecue, and if we had our people from home and the Hemmings Nation kind of hanging out with us. How did you get into cars? Let's take it all the way back to when you were 2, your first SEMA, and like walk us through how you got into this stuff, because I know you've got a pretty interesting background, and you've got like a background designing wheels and things like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, long life in automotive. So, you know, I've been at Meguiar's for 11 years. I've been in automotive culture since I was 14. I bought parts for a car I didn't have. Started selling stuff out of my mom's house when I was 17. So the way I got into it is when I was 14, my older brother, 7 years older, his friends, he had some friends that street raced. And that's how I got introduced to all of car culture here in Southern California, street racing Mecca, right? And ended up going to a few of those events when I was with them when I was 14. And that's when I decided I want to buy a car. I mean, when I turned 16, I want to be able to modify a car that, you know, whatever I was going to get. Right. And so I quit.
Were these muscle cars, or what were these?
No, there were Japanese imports. Okay. You know, my brother's friends were fixing up. They were kind of like, you know, at that impetus or that starting when that trend was kind of going up. This was
90s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s?
Early 90s. So I stopped playing sports, and I took a job at a copy service copying medical records for insurance companies. I was actually the guy that called doctors' offices to schedule appointments for all of our people that would copy stuff. And with that money, I started to buy parts for a car I didn't have.
So you just had an idea of what you wanted and just started buying parts for it?
Yeah. And
awesome.
my room was filled with like different parts, and my friends would come over, and you know, at this point I was probably 15, and they were like, "You don't even have a car yet." I'm like, "But I will."
No, what kind of car did you want? Did you have something specific in mind?
Yeah, just a Honda Civic, you know, because that's what I was seeing around. And you know, I had my older brother's friends. That's what they had, and that's what I thought I could afford. It was like $5,000 back then. But you know, the Craigslist back at that time was a thing called the recycler. I don't know if you remember that. It was like the want ads in newspaper form, right? So I would buy and sell things. Like I had gone to maybe 2 stereo systems before I even had my first car. Because I would just like buy something and I'd like read about something else and then resell that stuff on recycler, and then buy something else, and it had wheels and other things. So I got my car when I was 16. Lucky enough, my mom kind of, you know, helped me out with that, and then quickly got into car culture. Started buying Japanese magazines I couldn't read, to look for parts. Hung out at all the car shops in Southern California, kind of on the weekly. It was basically like where I would just hang out for 4 or 5 hours and bug the salespeople and what's a cam do, and let me understand this. And pretty quickly started to sell stuff like auto power roll cages and, you know, intakes and whatnot on, you know, one part of LA that it didn't really exist. And so there was no internet at that time. So I would print out flyers because my brother was a DJ, so I knew how to promote clubs and stuff.
Awesome.
And so I just did the same thing, except I printed flyers for car parts instead of the club flyers. And I would put it on all the imports at the local city colleges. And that's how I started.
Okay, no, so paint the scene for me. So this is what I think is amazing. So everyone, you know, we all talk, I think, in the industry about the cars that we're building and how we did it. But culturally, like what was the universe like for you? Like what was the theater, you know, the JDM theater looking like? I mean, were you going to clubs? Was your brother getting you in through the back door where he was, you know, where he was spinning records? Like what was going on?
So it was definitely, at least for that, you know, start of this bubble that became, you know, import car culture, which led to the Fast and the Furious and all that stuff.
Right.
Was definitely a little bit of a kind of a grassroots social phenomenon, predominantly with Asian American kids in Southern California.
Right.
So it was kind of a thing where a lot of worlds kind of converged together. So like, you know, street racing culture, car culture, breakdancing, dance clubs at
like
colleges.
Streetwear, like, right, sneaker pimps, that kind of stuff.
Some sneaker stuff. It was really early on back then. I mean, Jordans were still huge. That was still a thing. Like that was the thing. Right? A lot of Filipinos are into J's for some reason, but more than just Filipinos. But for some reason, and I worked at Foot Locker as one of my first jobs. So that's how I kind of fell in love. But it all converged. Like even graffiti culture and all these things were just kind of part of this kind of youth movement.
So cool.
And so there was just a lot of different things that you went to. Some events were car related, some were more dance related, some were more, there's even this thing called friendship games, which were different colleges. It was just like a tournament of sports for different colleges, but it was mostly like Asian American clubs or fraternities that would play. And because there was just so many Asian Americans into cars, like it became a thing that you would kind of bring your car, and it was just these multiple worlds, you know, colliding together.
Wait, it just hit me. Were you also a b-boy? Please tell me you were a b-boy.
I was skateboarder.
Oh, yes.
I b-boyed. It got into something called housing right before the raves, when you wear like the crazy flare plants and you did all the light stuff. So dance culture was just such a big part of it. Like the, you know, world of dance, the stuff on TV. We were having those types of competitions back then. And the guy, Dave Gonzalez, who started that's where it came from. So there were these dance battles at parties, or colleges would do these dance competitions. And again, because car culture is such a big part of it, you would just see a lot of quote unquote racers that were there.
Right.
And I was kind of representative of that group.
Now, I don't want to push my luck with this because I feel like I'm on a roll here, but if you tell me you were a Jabberwocky, I will just fall off my chair right now. Were you a Jabberwocky?
No, I wish I was that good.
But if you were a Jabberwocky, you wouldn't be allowed to tell me you were a Jabberwocky. So
Yeah. Well, no, some of them have come out now.
Oh,
some
they have.
of
Okay.
The first gen guys are like,
Okay.
oh yeah, I'm a Jabberwocky.
A first gen Jabberwocker. Oh my God, that's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, we would watch guys like that ended up in that crew, and a bunch of other ones, because that's where it came from, right? It was a lot of this stuff was so grassroots oriented.
Wow.
So I was kind of part of all that. Got to college, met some guys at starting Super Street magazine, and kind of ended up working for them for a little while, and paid my way through college by being a magazine editor and photographer.
That's hardcore car guy
stuff.
Right, that's awesome.
Yeah, which really built my network. I was already modifying cars and entering shows and competing by that point, and I needed to find a way to fund that, and still stay in school and to also fund school. So I had my own business selling stuff. I had a shop for a little while, and then my mom was like, "You can't go to school and do that at the same time," because I almost failed out of college. And so she's like, "No way! I don't care if you get a degree in basket weaving, you can get a degree." So I closed my shop down, and I ended up becoming an editor for 5 to 7 years, something like that. So,
like, you were almost your own entire series of the Fast and Furious. Like, you just told me, like, the prequel to the Fast and Furious, right? Like, that's like, you basically
I was definitely a proponent of the whole culture and the scene, and I was very involved in Battle of the Imports and Import Show Off, and I had a big car club, one of the biggest in SoCal at that time. And then the Fast and the Furious came along, and so I was working at Peterson Publishing at Super Street, and they also had an import drag racing association called NYRA that Craig Lieberman ran, and I also worked for that group. So I ran the car show portion of NYRA, and Craig was my boss. Wow. But he was also in my second car club called Art in Motion, and they found Craig. They hired him on as a consultant, and they asked him if he knew any young Asian guys that grew up and knew the world, and he's like, "Oh, funny you ask." So he invited the producers to like an import car show, and I met them there, and I got hired on as the second consultant for the film. Okay. And so Craig and I worked, helping choose vehicles for the characters, helping choose parts, and contacting friends in the industry to say, "Hey, you want to be involved in the small movie that we're making?" Because it wasn't that big of a deal when we were making it, right?
A small movie that just a little project we've got going on here.
Well, right? you have to remember Fast and Furious, when none of those actors were really A-listers by any means. They're all coming off really small films or teeny bopper films. I think Paul was coming off Varsity Blues or Skulls. Vin was coming off Pitch Black. Michelle had just done an indie. Jordana was a soap star, so no one was really known. Right. And when we filmed it, the budget wasn't crazy. When Craig and I were asking for mega favors from all of our friends just to like support these extra cars that we had to build and whatnot, and everyone's like, "Yeah, what's this for?" Yeah. And it's funny, nobody cared about the movie until it came out. Then everyone cared.
But see, this is the way it always works, right?
Yeah, it's always, But so I had a couple lines in the film, actually. So I was both a consultant and an actor.
Did you really? Now, which scene? Okay, now I know most of. I mean, my favorite was Tokyo Drift, but then the first one, where were you? What scene were you in?
So in the first movie, there's a really big race in the beginning where Paul Walker is trying to, gain Vin Diesel's Dominic's trust. Yes. And there's 4 characters in that first racing. So it's Vin Diesel's character Dominic, Paul Walker's character Brian, and then Ja Rule, who's in this red Integra, and this Asian kid that plays the video game in the white Civic. And so that's my character. Yeah, I had a couple lines in that.
Oh, I gotta go back and watch this all over again, man.
I still get residuals, so I'm.
Do you really?
Like, yeah.
I'll watch it twice, dude. I'll watch it twice just for coming on the barbecue.
Speaking of sneakers, it buys me a pair of sneakers every quarter. It's All
right, fair enough. Done deal. Yeah. Done deal.
So that
count me in for an eyelet. I'm watching it twice.
That movie definitely, really rocket launched kind of my next life stage after I got out of college, because I was just getting out of college when that movie launched, and I was already starting to consult and help people understand like youth car culture was what most people called it, right? Bunch of kids modifying Japanese import cars, and what cars mattered, what kind of parts. So because I worked at Super Street, my other boss, Matt Pearson, big companies would go to him like, "Tell us about this new magazine that Peterson started that has this like rocket, hockey stick growth." And he's like, "Oh, you should talk to this really young, yappy 20-year-old on my staff. He's been into it, at that time, like 5 or 6 years. And he knows all the different models of Hondas and Toyotas, and he'll just tell you what he knows." And so I started kind of consulting on the side because of him. He'd be like, hey, RJ,
Wow.
just talk to these guys, you know? And I'm like, okay, sure. And he's like, oh, don't forget to get paid. And I was like, no, it's cool. I just want people to be involved. He's like, no, RJ, people get paid for this stuff.
Yeah, right.
And so that's, the consulting work. So after the movie, people found me like crazy. So that's when I developed a whole wheel line. Motegi Racing is still around. So I helped develop that. I had my own line for about 7 years called Rojan Motorsports. And then I just did a bunch of stuff for, you know, whether it was Microsoft or Forza Motorsports or for Pepsi Cola, who wanted to be in the space and, you know, do something for the brand to integrate, to really promote their brand within this, you know, youth movement. Right. And I had clients, I mean, I had the consulting like for about 8 to 10 years. So Boost Mobile, Valvoline, a bunch of OEMs, die-cast toys. And even this job, I was consulting at Meguiar's before I joined the company back in 2009. So,
and
I did that for a long while.
Like, is it all just the boots on the ground networking, like face-to-face in-person networking that you do to become a consultant in this space? Or is there some sort of magical like Facebook for how does that work?
Not at that time, you know? So I think it was just getting off the ground, like some of the internet stuff. So a lot of it was still word of mouth. Because I'd kind of worked at the magazine for so long, I did meet a lot of people through your normal networking of just being out and about. And I, even till this day, I go to 2 to 3 car meets a weekend, you know, just to meet people and look at cars. And I just really love it. Right. So for me, one, I was young and I was a big proponent of the movement of young people reinventing the wheel, right? Much like hot rodders in the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
But, you know, with a different type of car, right? You know, these Japanese imports. And to me, I wanted brands and people to be involved. And whenever anyone needed to learn about it, I was like, hey, I'll tell you all about it, you know?
Yeah, right.
And then I got really also very interested in marketing and branding. And so kind of, you know, put all these worlds together. And, you know, I had friends that started shops or different brands, and I would just work for free for a lot of people just to help them get it off the ground, because I just wanted to see it grow. And then at some point I became, because of the experience, people would kind of try and find me. Like the Pepsi people are a great example. I just got this random call like, hey, we've been looking for you. We finally found your number from this other person. Wow. We're an agency that works for Pepsi. Would like to talk to you. We understand you worked on the Fast and the Furious, and we'd really like some perspective. Wow. I said, oh, sure, no problem. You know, so that became just kind of the MO. And you work on one big project, and then the second big project, and a third big project. You know, ended up
it just builds, right?
Yeah, it just builds. I had a show on MTV for a couple of seasons.
You did?
Because of it was called.
What was that? Trick It Out.
It was a reality car competition. It was kind of paired with Pimp My Ride. So after season 3 or 4 of Pimp My Ride, they decided they wanted to do another automotive show, but instead of just a makeover show, they wanted to do a competition, like a competition makeover. Okay. So we had this show that had like 2 teams that would get junkers that would only had like 2 weeks to build it. And then I was the host and the judge of this show, which was a lot of fun, actually. A little cheesy for sure. Because I gotta find
this. I gotta find this. This has to be on some sort of streaming.
It's tough to find because it's before YouTube. So there's a few clips on YouTube because this is 04 and 06. And so I helped develop some of the themes for that we would give the different teams. So a little bit of it was cheesy because it was made for MTV, but it was still a lot of fun. Awesome. And that led to other things as well, you know. So it was really cool. I mean, I kind of just started to work in different industries, but all revolved to cars. Like people with die-cast toys came to me and were like, hey, can you help with this die-cast toy line? And then I ended up working on the video game side with, you know, Forza and Microsoft, and, you know, met the guys at Gran Turismo. And I was like living out my dream of it's funny, we work with influencers now at Meguiar's, but I was kind of one of those before that was a term.
Before it was a thing.
Yeah, we just called it brand ambassadors and not influencers, right? But you know, definitely I was in different ads for the wheel line, tried my luck at racing. I always say I was always good enough to spend money, but never good enough to make money.
To make it right.
Yeah.
You should have one of those stickers on the back of your car. Like the bumper sticker says driver carries no cash, right? Like that's every racer's,
No, it sucked because I had some really good friends that did make it. And I ended up being a part owner of a drift team with one of my best friends, and Dai Yoshihara was the driver, and he still has his own team now, and it's fully fledged, full-time professional driver, which is amazing to see. But it was a hard reality to know, like, I'm not that good, right? I'm good enough to be decent, but not that good to be professional in that sense. So oh well. It's kind of part of the game.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's like when you graduate from high school and you're looking at colleges and you were the best in high school, but then you get to college and you're like, everyone was the best, right? Like you're now like, crap, it's it's a real wake-up call sometimes.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Believe me, I know that feeling.
But I still love to drive, and I still go to track days, and, relive my life as a race car driver in my head,
Great.
So
you have to have a portrait of yourself holding a helmet with a real pensive look off. Distance,
I have a couple feet, I had the full race suit, and I was building this pro front wheel drive drag car. And so I have a couple. I just was showing someone a feature back in 06 where I'm in my full Sparko fire suit with my custom helmet and everything,
Okay, so I've got a question for you, and this is one of the things that comes up fairly often. So, especially in Southern California, I know here on the West Coast in particular, there are these factions of car culture, because car culture has been around long enough, right? Where you've got silos, to use a marketing term, where you've got the hot rodders and the JDM people, and then you've got the classics and the off-roaders and the trophy. Did you see, and I'll use, maybe it's analogous to the early Fast and Furious franchise. Did you see any sort of crossover between what you were doing with the JDM and import scene and muscle cars or hot rodding or drag racing or like the traditional hot rod thing that was happening basically at the same time? Did you have crossover with that? Or were you so separate from that you just kind of lived your life without knowing anything about them, and vice versa?
Well, we definitely knew about each other. So a lot of events on the import side started because they didn't allow like Japanese cars. Like Battle of the Imports was a drag racing series that got started by a guy who got turned away when he tried to take his RX-7 to, a drag night.
Like a test and tune night or something like that? Oh, interesting.
So that, there was kind of course, there was always knowledge of each other. And at the street races, the biggest races were always like the import versus the domestic, but you would do your homework, right, in a way. And then there were places like Terminal Island, which was like an 8th Mile drag strip, Friday night drags, where everyone was welcome, so you kind of met other people. But in terms of crossover, like right now in this era, there's so many things influencing each other. So I judge Battle of the Builders, right, for SEMA. And there's 3 judges there: a hot rod judge, a truck judge, and then a sport compact judge. Right. But, when we look at cars that are built these days, there's so much more crossover than 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Like when I was building import cars, I looked to the Japan. I didn't look at what any of the hot rod guys were doing.
Right.
But now, as builds have kind of really elevated, and as the internet has really made the whole world more global, everyone's looking at everyone else's stuff.
It's like it's everything all the time, now, right? Just like everything else is.
Yeah, and different race cars are inspiring other race cars, or other builds, and fab guys are looking at across the board now. Where back then you really kind of didn't. I was kind of part of the drag racing era, not the drift era. So we did look at what was a pro stock car like, except ours were backwards, right? Because front wheel drive. So we had different dynamics that we had to play with, but we got to a level that we did start building things in the way the Americans muscle car guys were doing, because it was full fabrication, right? And you had to go to a guy that was fabricating hot rod stuff, because there were no import guys that were fabricating in that way that could do full tube chassis and whatnot. Right. So like there was an evolution. It took a while, but definitely it was a lot more siloed, like you said before. I feel like there's a lot more convergence now. Even though certain people are still into a certain type of vehicle, whether it's overlanding and off-road or JDM import or Euro or exotic or hot rod muscle, whether it's classic or modern. I feel like there's a little bit more openness across the different segments.
Cross-pollination now, right? I mean, even I've got a 27 Model T that I'm building with a blown 392 Hemi in it. And even I'm like, I just bought injectors from an import tuner site because I'm hiding injectors underneath my hat, so but that's where you got them from, you want that you want some sort of streetability and not just being able to run a vintage drag motor on the street is almost impossible. And everyone tells me no. And then I look to things like an import tuner site where I can buy, I could buy those injectors, build some sort of a rail, hide them underneath the blower hat. And maybe this might work.
Right.
But there's a lot of crossover these days with that stuff.
Yeah, it feels like and people are just more open, and they're more appreciative of the different types of build, and like on the Meguiar side, it's paint is paint, right? It doesn't matter what type of metal it's on, as long as it looks good, it looks good. And I think that mentality has kind of evolved where people they don't look at just their genre of interest, right? Because you can, there's that saying, inspiration can come from anywhere. And I think people have realized that as they look at other builds and other forms of racing or other, types of vehicles that are built in a certain way. And I think people are learning from each other a lot more than, they've ever had from a vehicle kind of, build and maintenance perspective.
Well, and that brings up a good question that I've been dying to ask you in a forum like this, because I get into, we're Hemmings, right? And I get into a lot of conversations with the baby boomer and older generations about kids these days. And kids these days is always all one word with quotes around it. And there's usually an exclamation point at the end of it or some sort of angry emoji, right? And it's what I find is that there is, and I think it's just part of just entering different generations as we age, and which is just natural, right? It's just the human experience. But I think that what's happening is, as I see it, is that there is a tremendous amount of interest in car culture and the automotive aftermarket and customizing vehicles in whatever form that takes from a younger crowd and an under 30 crowd in particular. But it's just that they are not coming to it the way that the baby boomer generation ever did. And there seems to be this assumption that if you're not coming to this the way I came to it, if you didn't work hard and sell your newspapers on a bike route in the morning and send your cash in for a catalog and order parts from your catalog and call it, if you don't do it that way and you don't listen to the way I'm telling you to do it, well, then you must not be interested. And my point is always, there are generations coming to this stuff through channels that you're not even aware of, things like video games, movies. I often say that, and to your point earlier, I often say that there's an entire generation of drivers, people with driver's license, young drivers, who don't know a world without the Fast and Furious franchise, right? Tell me a little bit about what you think of that. I mean, how are younger people coming to this stuff now?
Yeah, it's definitely changing quite quickly, much more quickly than it ever has. But I remember myself 25 years ago, I was the young person pissing off that older person. And now I'm kind of in the middle. There's almost three stages, right? So there's the boomers, and then there's guys like me who are Xers, right?
Yep, that's why I'm a Gen X. Yep.
Right.
And now we're the old guys, right?
Now we're the old guys, and we look at the 19, 20, 25-year-olds and go,
you kids,
oh God,
don't know. Right. Yeah, right.
So I think there's, of course, social media is kind of, whether it's TikTok or something else that's, really powering, kind of the interest with the young people these days. It feels a little bit later than us because, we didn't have cell phones, right? So at 16, our car was still our freedom, back in the late 80s, early 90s. With the new kids, your phone is your freedom. So I do feel like for certain kids, like the fascination with cars isn't coming as early as it did for me. It's coming later on when they're making a little bit more money, or maybe they're out of college or whatever that wave is in terms of like the economy.
Need to spend, right? Like it's makes sense.
So it feels a little bit different the way, although there's still really young people that are into it. But it doesn't feel like the groundswell is at 16. It feels a little bit later. But they're coming through it through different means. So their new form of media is different, right? It might be they're watching some guy on YouTube, that they really that's become their idol, right? So we work with quite a few influencers that have become that, and they're still fairly young. They're in their mid-20s, right? TJ Hunt's 26, Dustin's the same. Chris Fix, I think, is, I don't know, maybe later 20s. So it's not, these guys are fairly young. And then there's another crop of your next influencers who are following in their footsteps, who are like 19. I think one of the kids we work with, Jack Automotive, is like 19, but he's got 3 cars already. He's got he's got a Ford Focus, like a Ford Focus RS was his first car at 16. He bought an R32 Skyline GTR at 17, and he bought an R8 at 18. That's how much money he was making. It was crazy.
All off of YouTube.
All from YouTube. He was playing racing games on YouTube when he started. He started when he was 14. So I met him at SEMA. He was 17. I'm like, wow, this is one of the first people that I've met that started coming to SEMA, because I started going, I was 20. My aunt had to come, because at that time in Vegas, they wouldn't rent you a room unless you were 21 or over. Oh my God. Right. But this kid was 17. Awesome. And I was like, you're coming to SEMA already? He's like, oh yeah, I have 2 cars already. And I was like,
what?
Yeah. But it's, part of it is, it's good for them, like a company like Google said, we're going to help evangelize the way to make money by doing ad share revenue. Like you and I never had that opportunity. No. And for these kids, I mean, there's a lot of people that there's a lot of things with millennials and Gen Z that people say that, of course, some of it's true and some of it is. Some of these kids work their butt off.
Yes.
They're filming every day. They're editing until 3 a.m. They're dropping content. I'm like, everyone's like, RJ, you should do that. I'm like, no effing way.
Yeah, right.
Nah. No. Yeah, like
that. We don't have the energy anymore. We're too old. Right?
No,
I just want to sit down.
It's a different hustle, so
that's a great way to put it, RJ. It's a different hustle. That's a great way to
hustle. And I had my own hustle 20 years ago, and you did too, in a different way. And it's a different life stage now. But there's definitely young people that I've met, and I'm like, wow, I remember working that hard too. And they're just doing it in a different way, and they don't see it as work. It can be a black hole. I mean, the whole social media thing and always being on and not being able to turn off. A couple of the people we work with, there's been days they've been burnt out. They're like, man, we're just so burnt out. I'm like, you need to take a break.
Right. Right.
And like enjoy car culture for what it is and not worry about making content, right? Because everyone's like content, which is part of the game. Yeah. But there's a moment where it's like, we also love this because it's a culture. So let's make sure we enjoy this.
We have to make sure we enjoy it, right? Because it'll show immediately if we're not enjoying it. And like, to your point too, it's not like when we were kids, and I will say now as an old guy, Gen Xer, my job was pushing a broom, in a shop. And that's how you get into it. Holding the wrench for my dad or the flashlight or whatever. And that's how you get into this stuff. But it, like you said, it is no less work. And it is certainly a hustle to do what they're doing online and actually generating content. I don't think people understand what it takes to actually do that. Right. That's a big job.
And what it takes more than just 30, 60, or 90 days, right? Yeah. When some of these kids have been doing it for 7 years, day in and day out. And, it was like me writing articles for a magazine for 7 years, right? In a different format. But now they got to edit. And it's a lot of the fundamentals are the same. The tools are different.
The tools are different, right?
Yeah. So that's what's really interesting, and of course, what relates to a certain age group. Some people are going to get because they're in that age group versus, there's stuff I look at. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but more power to you if that, if that floats to someone's, if that inspires someone, right?
Yeah.
Then doesn't inspire me because I've already built up my own kind of things that I'm into and things that inspire me. And I think that's where like old people kind of get frustrated or trip up, right? Because like you said, they look at it only from their perspective.
Yes.
And a lot of that, you just got to open the mind up a little bit. So,
and even for me, like I'm at the point now where it's even hard for me to understand how, a platform like say Twitch might actually be an entry point for car culture. Like that's hard for me to get my head wrapped around. And I still don't have a TikTok account, but my wife does, like that kind of stuff. It's just, it takes longer, it takes longer.
And it's easy to generalize, right? Until you get into it.
That's
right.
True.
And some of the generalizations are true. There's always an ounce of truth in some of those things.
Of course.
There's also, things evolve. And so a lot of times you kind of forget that things evolve.
Yes,
I mean, TikTok is a great example. It started off as a an app for really young people, young kids to like follow these dance moves like a video game.
Yeah.
And now like the amount of just even car care that's on TikTok is ridiculous.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's surprising. Like we have a couple of videos on TikTok, million views. Really? Which is insane. And they're short, right? Because it's short, snappy, and kind of fun.
Yeah, right.
Like we have this one on cleaner wax that we did, and it's just a can that's opening so you can hear it. So there's a trend called ASMR.
Is it the ASMR thing?
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit of the trickle.
Yep.
And it's a cleaner wax. We open it, we pop off the plastic thing. We can hear the pop really, sound. We put the applicator, you put on the car, and then we wipe it off. And that's all it is.
That's it.
It's nothing crazy.
Million views.
And all these comments, like if it was just views and no comments, it'd be like, okay. But it was like, and all these comments, it was like, it's just a different way to consume content, So
yes, right. Well, and that brings up a good point too. Do you feel at all as though, especially during this pandemic, and this is, of course, this is very immediate, but the idea of there's all of these that I've seen a trend of it recently where it started off, it seems like that there was this trend of videos of just what I would almost call just satisfaction videos, like a knife cutting through butter or something. like, do you feel like, putting wax on a car or some sort of cleaning agent on a car and wiping it away and revealing a luster and shine, like, was that something that people would just tap into, maybe that weren't even necessarily car nerds, but it was just something relaxing, maybe on
like
YouTube? Therapeutic. Yeah. Do you think there was anything to that?
One of my social media manager and I were talking about it today because we were like, why would cleaner wax of all things, right?
Right.
It's paste wax. I don't even how many people really use paste wax these days?
Right.
Not the majority anymore, right? But somehow I think it captured this feeling, right? We do at Meguiar's, we do say for a lot of people, car care is therapeutic, right? You get away in your garage, it's just own me time.
Yes.
And I think things like cooking and sewing or home improvement, there's these things that people zone out to that to them is therapeutic because it gives them some time to focus their energy and be creative or do something that takes their mind off the craziness of their everyday world.
Yeah.
And we also have these memories of it too, right? A lot of our products have a scent to it. So when I use Quick Detailer, it brings back a lot of memories because there's that olfactory scent.
Right.
Yeah. So I think
don't they say that memory is like the olfactory sense, the sense of smell is one of the most triggering.
Yeah. All five senses, not just what you see, what you hear, like music. Right. That's why so many people love music, right? They'll hear a song and they'll remember like prom, or like I was graduating college, or like I was, did something and it was like a momentous day, and so I think, especially during this time of being confined at home, people started to travel through their phone or their TV or do things that they may have physically done, but now they were kind of just watching it and reliving kind of the emotion without actually doing it.
Yeah.
So I do feel there's a lot of things out there on social that are just resonating with people because people haven't had the chance to go out and do it. Right. Because we've all been kind of confined. A lot of people have also done a lot of home projects, which include their vehicles. I mean, if you talk to, I'm sure any of the advertisers you have, like, Jags and Summit.
Just off the rails. Yeah. They're just back order. They can't keep stuff in stock. Yeah. Right. Now,
which is,
that brings up a good question with you, especially with Meguiar's. Did you see like a spike in sales of,
it was crazy last year.
People just at
Still
home.
Crazy.
We're just gonna, I'm after 6 years of owning this thing. Now that it's paid off, I'm gonna wax it. Is that how people are treating it?
Well, I think people just wanted to do stuff at home, like the whole cleaning movement, your whole house, your car,
and recondo your car.
Yeah. Like and it's funny. We thought it would slow down because like you're not driving anywhere, so why would you wash it again, right?
Right.
But and it's still right now, it's still crazy. We just like most of the world, we're having stock issues like you wouldn't believe. Everyone's competing for bottles and sprayers and labels, whether you're a cleaning agent for the house or you're a can of soup or you name it, right? So it's definitely a challenge globally, I think.
Just containers and things like that, huh?
Yeah, I think feel like the whole like OEMs are having issues getting computer chips, right? Or
we've heard about that on the news, right?
Right, semiconductors and everything's back order. So it's just a crazy time in the world. So,
It's amazing
luckily,
to hear that.
I think car culture for a lot of people has kind of kept people sane. It has for me, for sure. So,
Well, that was going to be my next thing then too, because not only do we see sort of what seemed like these relaxation videos and things, but then it's almost seemed to evolve into just these, I don't know if you've seen like these trapezoidal like videos of just, calm, or the calm apps and things like that. Yeah. It almost seems like car care, I know I'm this way, is that just rubbing your hands over something and watching it transform and seeing the fruits of your labor, right? Like seeing some sort of result after using some sort of a wax or a tire cleaner or a wheel cleaner, whatever. That seems like so relaxing right now. It almost like it calms you, I would say, to a certain degree, right?
It can, I think, and beyond just maintenance, a lot of, let's call it rejuvenation or improvement, whether that's your vehicle, right? Or whether that's your house or some arts and crafts thing that you're doing. I think people are finding pleasure in those types of content, right? Yeah. So for us, it's worked. And I'm sure for people build, a lot of the influencers we work with, that's what they do. They build cars in their shop, right? And their views have exponentially exploded as well. So, it's great to see that people are, consuming that content, and hopefully as the world starts to open back up again, it means that more and more people will kind of continue their love with car culture, their affair with car culture, and hopefully even expands, right? Because there's always that worry of like, what is the next generation gonna do in terms of, are they going to follow in the footsteps and keep car culture alive, right? Right. Especially with the advent of electric cars and hybrid cars and all the things that are how mobility is changing, what the industry is calling as a change in mobility, right? So it'll be interesting to see like how all of this kind of affects that. Because I think there's multiple generations that you've talked about that's always been worried, like is the next generation going to be,
is that going to be the end of it, right?
And they're going to carry the torch.
Right. Are they going? Well, and that's a good question. I mean, do you see, especially from where you sit in Southern California, which I think is still, no matter what, is always going to be, I think, the undisputed, Jerusalem for car culture.
It's the Mecca for sure.
The Mecca, right? And like, what do you see coming up on the horizon? I mean, are you seeing things happening or little bits and glimpses of things that seem cool?
I think right now over the last 10 years, there's just been a lot more segmentation of like, let's call it micro segmentations, like within the tuner world, within the Euro exotic world, within the off-road world, there's like all these splinters that are happening. Yeah. And to me, it's a lot of it's tied to experience, like what people are experiencing with their vehicles. But I think the next 5 years, it's really unknown because 2025 is a big year for electric mobility, right? China's going to go full electric. There's going to be, I think the last report I read, 250 different models of electric or hybrid power plant vehicles, and so I think that's going to change a little bit, but I don't think the idea of like wanting to personalize something and making an extension of yourself is going to change. I think that's human nature.
That's human nature, right? I've said that a million times. It's like, we'll always want, as long as there are individual forms of transportation, we will always want to personalize them, whether it's a skateboard or an electric car, right?
Right. So that's the word that you said there that's really key is individual modes of transportation. So with the OEMs are very much concerned about two things, right? Connected car and autonomous vehicles. That can really have a drastic effect on car culture, right? If vehicles, and a couple OEMs are testing subscription models and whatnot, where you can change cars, which sounds really great, but then it's not your car anymore.
Right.
So can you personalize it? Probably not. Right. So that's going to be one of the major deciding factors in my head. But at the same time, I think even if you lease, you have a subscription for a car, I think at one point when you have kids and whatnot, you're going to end up buying something because you don't, right? Because it's like more than just one person. It's like for four people. So I think it's just going to evolve, but it's going to get a little bit more muddy in the next 5 to 7 years. I mean, the whole automotive industry is like bracing itself for like, what is the new buying model? What is the future of synthetic fuels, gasoline cars, electric cars, hydrogen powered cars? It's a lot of this is all not determined. I mean, there's a big push towards electrification right now, and that's what it looks like it's headed. But if Porsche figures out synthetic fuels, if the Japanese kind of get more support for hydrogen vehicles, like there's so much kind of in play and up in the air that to me, it's going to be really interesting to see like what evolves and what's the fallout. And then of course, what the next generation, decides to do with their vehicles from a personalization standpoint, right? And customization standpoint. So, and then what's collectible, right? So someone like us, there's different things that are collectible, right? A lot of my friends have bought, much like the boomers bought their 60s muscle cars that they had in high school. A lot of my friends have bought the 80s or 90s Toyota Supra, Mazda RX-7, Honda, whatever, Civic, Prelude, Integra, Acura NSX. That was kind of, for me, my childhood kind of high school dream
Prelude
car.
Like when was the last time you saw a Prelude on the road? Like I haven't seen a Prelude. Like what happened to those? Like they just disappeared. Those in Jettas. Like, you don't see a first gen Jetta anymore. Like where'd those go? There were a million of them.
There's people that are buying them and restoring them in the same way that boomers are restoring lots of the hot rods from the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, right?
The muscle cars and stuff.
So most of it's 90s, but there's people doing 70s Datsun or 80s, Mazda, first gen Mazda RX-7, GSXL or whatnot. So it's kind of cool to see kind of all of these things happening,
Do you think, like, especially with brand new cars, now I've watched, as a as like a I don't want to say I'm a muscle car guy, but I'm still a V8 guy, right? And watching what Dodge did with the Challenger and almost the infinite customization of that car, that seems sort of rare these days. I mean, do you see with brand new cars that all seem to be going in some sort of version of an egg shape? I mean, are we going to be able to customize those things at all? I mean, you can't just, there are no bumpers to switch out anymore. You can't change the grill, right? Like, what do you do with these things as just to customize them?
It's becoming more difficult because even in my era, there was a lot of body components and whatnot. But if you look at a Tesla Model 3, I have a lot of friends that they make parts for that car and they are always sold out. And it's more wheels. A lot of people are wrapping their cars or doing something with color, right? So color is always something that you can customize.
Yes. Could I have seen a lowered Tesla about a week or two ago? I thought so. This thing was lowered with like a flat black paint job. I'm like, wait a minute. That's a wheels. Hot rod. Okay.
Different thing. You can't modify a lot of the mechanical stuff, although people are screwing around with like, can you juice up the electric motor or things of that nature? Very difficult to do because
a bigger rubber band, right? Like
but some of those cars are fast, right? They're crazy fast.
I was talking to we just interviewed Leno, and Leno was saying the same things. Like the fastest car I've ever driven was a brand new it's crazy how fast
the Plaid. Well, it's a different type of propulsion. Right, it's very different type of propulsion.
Right. There's no energy loss, right?
There's no loss in the componentry, right? And the way the motor turns the wheels is so much more direct. And even the way the motor works is completely different than your combustion engine.
Right.
So it's a little bit of it's like apples and oranges at the end of the day. I haven't driven an electric car that's that nimble yet, although I haven't driven a Porsche Taycan. I've heard it drives really, really well, considering. But I'm curious. I'm also very curious to see more hybrid style power plants like the NSX and some of that technology from 918 LaFerrari and P1 kind of evolve. Ferrari's got SF90 right now that just launched, which is insanely fast. For what it is. So I'm interested to see if that technology continues to trickle down to even my Honda Accord that I drive every day.
Do you think from your seat at Meguiar's, Do you see, because I remember like it was a couple years ago now, maybe 10 years ago now, that I remember seeing that video from BMW where like the exoskeleton was like, it was almost like a blimp or like a dirigible. It had basically like a wire framework that with fabric over it, and actually had eyelids that could blink. You know, it was like a BMW like show
like a concept car,
the concept car.
Yeah.
Well, do you see from your Meguiar's seat like a difference, or are you bracing yourself from an entirely new type of finish or exoskeleton or building materials or body skin materials coming up that you're gonna have to deal with?
Both just at Meguiar's and just as a fan of car design, I've definitely seen concepts where the exterior is more than just a painted surface.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting to see what they'll be able to do. I mean, the next thing they've talked about are plastics that are injection molded that have color in them already versus painting them. So that'll change the texture and how you protect it and whatnot. And then there's just the stuff where, you know, it's almost digital. The surfaces of the car where, you know, it's almost like LEDs, or it can project, you know, kind of like a TV it can change. And then there's some stuff from BMW where, like the tires can kind of morph and change. The body can kind of morph. Whether that's reality in the near future, like in, let's call it the next 5 years,
right?
But maybe in the next 10 or something, as you know, depending on how intricate surfaces can get, and whether they can morph or not, or you know, whether they can, let's call it self-heal, as they say.
Right.
And so I think there's going to be a lot of composite technology that might change some of that. And then it's, how does it show color is probably the second big question. Is it painted? Right. Is it infused in the material? Is it more of a screen that the color can change? So what's on top of the screen?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's basically like a weighted thunder blanket in those fuzzy colors that I like to curl up with, you know, and watch reruns of Mad, you know, whatever. Right. Am I just going to pull a sleeve over my car? It's going to be fuzzy, you know, like I want that.
Yeah. I think that's a little bit more, you know, 20, 30 years down the road than 5, 10. So it seems to be that most people are more concerned about the power plant and what's driving the power plant, right? And you really have gasoline, hydrogen, electric are the three, and then variations of multiple of those
combinations of it, right?
Yeah. So I think that's really the big focus. There's, of course, you know, talk about what the next body panels look like, which, you know, or even the interior. I mean, we make products for interior, exterior, and even tires. So there's a lot of talk about the interior of cars, what that's going to be like, especially if autonomous becomes much more normal.
Right. That's good. That's a great point. And I met a dude not too long ago at the grocery store, of all things, and he's got 5 kids, and he had a brand new, I think it was a Model S Tesla with a white interior. And I said, how do you have 5 kids and you got a white? He's like, oh, actually, he goes, that's actually a much more cleanable surface than anything else you can buy these days. I'm like, really? But he swore by it, you know. I'm like, a white, and he goes, it's the material. I go, I don't know. Maybe.
They might have some sort of coating on top of that, because we do some work with Tesla OEM in terms of, like, you know, paint correction after the cars get out of the paint booth. But I think we've talked to them about interior. So my guess is that material has some sort of protective barrier on top of the white that makes it easy, kind of like, you know,
hose it down Scotch Guard.
Yeah, you know, something that's protecting it, and Scotch Guard's a great example. Or you know, like how a lot of things have like a protective film that you can't really see. Right. That just keeps things a lot more durable. So my guess, I don't know enough about the Tesla interiors, but yeah, autonomous can really change the game, right? If Class 5 becomes a reality, then your car becomes a little bit more of a moving living room.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there's concepts where, like, the chairs turn around and you've got it facing like two.
Oh man, like the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? Like the concept.
Yeah. So
like
that'll be very, very interesting too. So it's definitely a wild west again, I think, in the next 5 years for automotive, which is scaring a lot of people and exciting a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, a brand like Meguiar sits on the periphery because it's just about cleaning all the surfaces and protecting all those surfaces, regardless of.
There's always going to be a surface, right? Yeah, right. You're in good shape.
So for us, I think we're in a good place. For other businesses, maybe not as much. And then it's also, you know, what's going to be the thing with collecting versus new, and are you going to have one of each? And, you know, are my last collector car was a V8 AMG Gullwing. And so is a car like that going to become more like a racehorse that you're going to keep at a place like Thermal?
Right.
And you drive there and you take it around the track.
Take it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be like that? Or are those cars still going to be around? And again, not in the next 5, 10, but 30 years from now, 50 years from now, what is that going to look like? 100 years from now, what is that going to look like?
It's amazing. I mean, I think the two constants that we can always rely on is Meguiar's basically, and little trees. It's going to be like air cleaners.
There's a couple other things. I think tires are always going to be something.
You think tires are always something?
Well, until
we're not going to hover.
Yeah, until they hover or
Yeah, that's why I wonder.
We thought we'd be doing that by what was Back to the Future?
Right.
It was
by
2020, right?
I think we're saying this year is supposed to happen, right?
And we're so far off. I mean, maglev trains are the closest thing, and that's the whole infrastructure would have to change, So I think tires are going to be around for a long time.
At the very least, RJ, if the tires aren't under us, they'll probably be around us like a bumper car. Because if we're up in the air, we're definitely crashing into each other, right? That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, floating cars are going to be gnarly if that ever happens.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that day. I'll still drive my 74 F350, but I want a floating car, So
I mean, I wonder what the roads will look like when you have to have, I mean, I still love, that's one of my favorite cars in the world.
Yes.
Ralph Lauren's, 37 Bugatti, SC Atlantique. Yep. And I hope that still is able to drive the roads in 50 years, I
say bring back the stand-up seam that runs down that Bugatti. I think that's a good design cue that we should bring back.
That Bugatti is pretty, and
beautiful.
It's why I love the new Chiron so much, because there's so much design language from the SC Atlantique into the Chiron, right? So, yeah, it's cool that they've done that, and then there's talk about Bugatti being fully electric, right? I think in 2025 or something.
It's not that far off.
It's not far off. I think they've made an announcement. They're going to be fully electric after whatever the next model is after the Chiron. And then I think everything after that, maybe even after the Chiron, I think everything's going to be, 2,000 horsepower, full electric.
Amazing.
Whatever, which will kind of
2,000 horsepower, all electric. That's amazing to even think about.
Yeah. Well, it's, those motors are, I mean, look at the new Rivian truck that's coming. It's like 800 horsepower or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Whoever said whoever thinks that this is not the golden era of horsepower is not awake right now, right?
Yeah.
Power.
Those things are so easy. I mean, look at the Tesla Plaid or whatever. But the thing is, you're running out of the contact patch. You can't really get it that much quicker.
Right.
Because it's there,
physics
you're running,
gets in the way, right?
Physics gets in the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Amazing.
It's how much quicker can you get 0 to 60?
We should definitely keep that. Definitely keep working on that.
Yeah.
Well, RJ, man, I can't believe we've actually been able to take an hour out of our time. It feels like 20 minutes, but I really appreciate you coming on the barbecue.
No worries.
This is great. This is great.
Yeah, we didn't even get to eat barbecue. So
I know.
When the world becomes normal, we're gonna have to have some barbecue.
Get back together again, real barbecue. That we can actually taste, not virtual, but real. Yeah, that's the next thing. That's the next thing.
I'm ready. I'm ready for some baby back ribs and
started. I think in the future what we're gonna have to do is eat while we do this. If they can mix some of that ASMR in there, just eat.
There you go.
It's gotta be gross, but that can't be a good idea.
Well, I appreciate the time for me
thanks.
to share stories and wax lyrical and all things cars. I love it.
This is great. We love it, man. Well, thank you. Hey, we'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
Awesome, thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.